There are 10 vital questions that every entrepreneur must answer in order to build a successful business. I'm going to take you through each of those 10 questions, and I'm going to teach you how to discover the answers out in the world and use those as the building blocks to build the business model that will make you successful. And after that, we're going to move on. We're going to look at what makes a 21st century business successful. E-commerce, search engine marketing, SEO. You don't have to know them now, we'll get to them. But before we get there at all, we're going to have to go back right to the very beginning and ask a very fundamental question. What is a business and how does it work? It's essentially a Copernican view of the universe. The whole thing circles around you. Now, around you are a series of other businesses that compete directly with you. The competitors in you can draw a box around, right in the middle of the page. That combination makes up your industry. Now, let's move to the right-hand side of the page. Many businesses sell to more than one type of customer. Those groups are called segments or market segments because they are segments of the entire marketplace that you sell to. If you draw a box around them, that makes up the entire marketplace. What I'm interested in, though, more than anything, is the space between the two of them. Now, it may be empty. It is certainly now. The question is, how do we fill it? And that really turns on whether or not you sell directly to a customer or you sell through other people. If you sell through any other person, then you're selling through what's known as a channel of distribution. And there's more than just channels of distribution. There's channels of awareness, channels of evaluation, channels of influence, channels for support. These are all different elements of your business that somehow have to reach the customer. On the left-hand side of the page, we're going to make a list of all the people who sell things to your company. Those people, in sum, are your suppliers. Once again, you draw a box around them and then draw the path that those supplies take to get to your business makes up something called the supply chain. So from the left-hand box to the middle is behind your business. It's known as upstream of your business. Downstream of your business is to the right-hand side. And so the goods, the products, and the services flow from the left to the right through your business and your competitors to your customers and the marketplace. So that's it. That's the map of a business. Whether you're a corner shop, a jewelry designer, or a young biotech company, you're all going to have a map, and that map is going to help you understand what you need to make your business successful. And now that we understand the products and services, we need to put a layer on top of it, and we need to take a look at that cash flow, that flow of money moving in the other direction. Money, of course, flows from the customer upstream through the channel to you, and upstream from you to your vendors. That flow of cash, known as cash flow, is basically how the cash moves and what portion of it sticks with you. And what we need to do is we need to map it. So when the customer buys a product from a distributor, the distributor keeps a bit of the money for themselves and then sends to you the majority. You then have elements you then have to pay on. Whatever sticks at your point and drops down then has to cover the overheads of your business, and if anything remains, you make a profit. If you draw a map of that cash, that flowing stream, you're in a position to monitor the health of your business and understand whether the business is likely to survive and prosper or whether there's not adequate cash flow to sustain you, your marketplace, your channels of distribution, and your suppliers. Okay, so that's the map. Products and services flowing to the right, revenue and pricing moving to the left. Every business has one. Now there's one key thing that every entrepreneur has to remember. There is a big difference between invention and discovery. You invent your product or service, you invent that advantage, but pretty much everything else is out there in the world waiting to be discovered. Whether it's your channel of distribution or which market segment, which customer you're going to focus on, who your suppliers are going to be, these are all waiting out there for you to discover, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. All businesses start with an idea, but not all ideas create great businesses. So what sets an idea in motion? An idea in motion is based on whether or not that idea also constitutes a great opportunity. An opportunity is an idea set in a context, say a window of time, thus the term window of opportunity, or a place or geography. That context is what will tell us whether or not you've got a good idea or a bad idea. We use the 10 questions to qualify ideas and determine whether or not they are good business opportunities. Remember, a business means you are providing a benefit to a customer based on an advantage that other companies do not have. So let's move on, let's go to that first question and start at the very beginning. What do we do that people need or want? What problem are we solving? What desire are we fulfilling? The answer to that question, described in terms of the benefit that we provide somebody else, is basically the product or service advantage we have. The key word there is advantage. That is the core advantage of the business. But before we go on to explain how to answer that question, you should understand that even though you may have only one product or service, you can have quite a few advantages. I'd like to run through the different types of advantages a business may have. Let's start with the most obvious one, new. New is an advantage when it's the mere fact that it exists and it has come to market that creates the desire for it. Think of fashion, for example. Every season, something new comes out. It depends upon its newness to be interesting to the customer. But new is not necessarily the kind of advantage you want. New is a tyranny. It requires you every quarter or every season or every year to recreate from ground zero. You never have earned your stripes. You always have to be new. It is not the kind of advantage that most companies want because you are never good enough and you can never rest on your laurels. But it is a very specific type of advantage. The second advantage is performance. Now we all think we know performance. That's when the new product is better than the old. Cars, computers are all primarily sold on performance. Let's think about cars though, because performance is slightly more complicated than you may think. If you create a new product that improves on the performance, is essentially better, faster, cheaper than the old one, it's not enough to be better. Because what you have to take into account are what are known as the switching costs. So let's say you create a car that is better fuel performance. Therefore, it gets more miles to the gallon. Well, let's think about exactly how many miles to the gallon it's going to have to be better than your old car, which you already own, so that you get back the, say, 20,000 pounds that you're going to have to spend on the new car. Let me tell you, you're going to have a much better performing car before it pays 20,000 pounds that you didn't have to spend at all for the old car. One of the reasons you see governments putting incentives in place for fuel-efficient cars is because by itself, the improved performance of an efficient car rarely takes up the cost of switching from a car that's bought and paid for, which is technically known as a sunk cost. So performance is a high hill to climb. You have to climb not just over the prior product, but over the cost of switching away from that prior product. The third advantage is price. Now, most people who are naive to business think that price is usually the differentiating factor, is usually the advantage that one company has over the other. But in fact, it's less often the case than you may imagine, even in commodities. Take the case of Amazon. Amazon sells books at an attractive price, but not necessarily the lowest price. In point of fact, I would assert that one of the key advantages Amazon has is the efficiency of delivery and the ease of ordering. Therefore, you may decide not to purchase the lowest priced book available on the web because you can purchase it more conveniently and with more likelihood of it arriving overnight from Amazon, and thus you're paying a slightly higher price. Thus, price is not the sole factor in Amazon's advantage. Sometimes, the question of price is the key factor, and the question then is, where have you placed yourself? Are you offering the same product for a lower price, or are you offering a lesser product for a lower price? So long as the price drop is greater than the drop in terms of performance and quality between your product and the next, then price will actually obtain an advantage. Think of Ryanair. Ryanair offers a lesser product. The seats are more uncomfortable, the service is non-existent, you fly to an airfield somewhere distant from the city you claim you're going to. And yet people still fly it. Why? Because the price drop is dramatic. And Ryanair is the master of efficiency, and they offer products at the lowest possible price. So that's actually a lesser product for an even lower price. So the question about price is not just whether or not you have a lower price, but whether you choose to even bother to match the competition in product. The next advantage is shared access. It's a relatively new proposition, but it's becoming very popular and it's changing the way a lot of businesses operate. Take the bike scheme in London or in Paris. Traditionally, you would buy a bike and own a bike, but what the bike scheme's permit is for you to share access to somebody else's bike. Now, there's large infrastructure costs for the company setting up the business. They have to put bikes everywhere. But from you as a consumer's point of view, you're taking a relatively expensive item and sharing access to it. And this is going into a lot of fields. There's a company called Zipcar, where it's doing the same thing with automobiles. You never actually even buy a car. So the advantage they have is not in a new product or service, but in the access they give you to old products and services. There's companies doing the same for art. Shared access says, let's share access to an expensive item amongst a large group of people and thus lower the cost of having the use of that item. The next advantage is personalization. Personalization is the notion that you can add a layer of service on top of a normal product or service and make it tuned to the person. Think of personal shopping assistants in department stores. Most people's experience of a department store is they walk in and they navigate their way through a huge array of goods to find what they want. Add in a personal shopper and the entire experience changes. Now you have somebody curating your experience. They're walking you through the store, finding out for you what you want. Department stores have found that for a certain group of their customers, that experience is very valuable and they will pay extra for it. Let's take another example. There's a company in London called A Suit That Fits. They've taken the traditional Savile Row approach of creating customized suits, made-to-measure suits, and they've cut a fair trade agreement with tailors in Nepal. So they offer a suit at close to off-the-peg prices that's actually made to measure. They have three advantages, don't they? Personalization, they have a price advantage, and they actually are doing good for the world. So they actually have a step up over the competitors. The next advantage is design. It is remarkable how few companies take advantage of this. Design is the notion that you marry form and function in a more elegant or beautiful way. The most obvious example is Apple. Apple are the masters of design. They make products that frequently do less, but are so intuitive and appealing to use that people would rather have a product that does less with less choice, that permits them to use it more easily, than one that offers more choice or more features. You can see this elsewhere. In the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, a series of German companies began to dominate the kitchen appliance market because their products simply were designed better. They looked better, they worked better, and people simply bought the beautiful over the ugly. I would contend that Google is a design-led company. When Google first emerged as a player, they had an empty homepage, which they still have today. Their competitors said, what a waste of valuable space. But what Google understood is that a narrow proposition is better than a broad one. And by focusing solely on search and leaving the rest of the page empty, people know what it was for, and they understood how to use it intuitively. That is a design-led company at heart. Design can be a great advantage. If you imbue your products with more than functionality, but also with beauty, more people will want to buy it. It doesn't have to lead to a higher price. It just leads to a more beautiful product. The next advantage is brand. Now, brand is not the province of small companies. Brand takes two things: a huge amount of money and a great deal of time. And when I say huge, I mean huge. Tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, pounds, or euros. The fact is, brand is what large companies do to set themselves apart. And a brand is not a logo. A brand is a promise. It's a promise that a company is making to a consumer. And whether they keep that brand promise or not will determine what people think of the company. Think of Nike, for example. What's their promise? Their promise, just do it, is essentially a sense of empowerment. And when people buy into Nike, they're buying into the freedom they get running on a country road. They're buying into the sense that they can accomplish things they might not otherwise accomplish. It has taken decades for Nike to achieve that position. Think of the granddaddy of all of them, Coca-Cola. Over and over again, there has been this blind taste test that Pepsi has run over the decades, trying to show people that Pepsi tastes better than Coke. And when you're wearing a blindfold, a majority of people will tell you Pepsi tastes better than Coke. And as soon as the blindfold comes off, our tastes magically change. And all of a sudden, Coke tastes better than Pepsi. What's happening? Is there some sort of strange alchemy that happens when you take off the blindfold? No. What happens is the power of a brand. That brand impact is what you're up against when you're up against a global competitor. It's a huge advantage, and you don't have it when you're a small business. The next advantage is risk reduction. Risk reduction is usually what an unknown or small company will do to lower the perceived risk of purchasing their product. Let's take cars. A used car is something that we all fear buying because we don't know where it's been, and we definitely don't trust used car salesmen. But if the used car comes with, say, a manufacturer's refurbishment warranty, this comes with a Mercedes used warranty, you start to think, well, maybe this used car is safe. You're reducing the risk of purchase by the customer. Think of when Hyundai, which is a Korean company, or Skoda, an Eastern European manufacturer, entered the market. The first thing they did was to put 5-year or longer warranties on their cars. Why? It cost them more, certainly. But they knew that their companies did not have a reputation for manufacturing. And thus, by putting a risk reduction policy in place, they created an advantage out of a disadvantage. The final advantage is remarkability. That act when a company has a product or service that by its very nature is remarkable. And I'm using Seth Godin's version of the term. Remarkable in the sense worth remarking upon or must be remarked upon. It drives word of mouth. Let me give you the most obvious example of all, Facebook. The product itself compels you to get your friends to come onto Facebook, because the more of your friends that are on Facebook with you, the better the product serves you. Therefore, the product is inherently remarkable. It makes you want to remark upon it, and it makes you want to have others join you in using the product or service. That's remarkability. So those are the 10 advantages that tie to your product or service. But the interesting thing about advantage is a company is not solely tied to having a product or service advantage. You can have advantages anywhere across that map we've drawn. Let's start at the right-hand side and move to the left. You could have advantages by having a much more narrowly defined series of market segments, a laser-like focus on making a few people very, very happy. You could have advantages in your distribution channel, where you sell through more distributors, thus your product is more widely available, or through alternative channels of distribution. If you make home-baked cookies, maybe it's better to sell them through the National Trust than through a Waitrose or a Safeway. An advantage can be in who you ally yourself with. You can have advantages of evaluation or influence. If you have a restaurant and you can persuade the reviewers that your restaurant is a better place to eat, then the influencers of the consumer are on your side. You can have advantages in the supply chain. Therefore, you could be buying your products at a better price. It's not well known, but Apple actually has a huge supply chain advantage. They buy in such bulk and with such intelligence that they frequently corner the market on key technology components that permit them to have better products. Take China. China, as a nation, has been buying up rare earth minerals over the last 2 decades in order to secure an advantage in their supply chains for the benefit of their companies. Sometimes sheer size and wealth alone creates advantage. A very large, wealthy company can put pricing systems in place. They can offer credit at a discount. The French boating industry, all yachts, sailboats that is, are largely made in France, or were for many years. That was partly because the French government underwrote the cost of purchasing a sailboat so that French companies were able to sell sailboats at a better price. And they drove their American and British counterparts out of business. That was a pricing advantage using the wealth of a nation behind them. The point is that I want you to have a very narrow product and a narrow service that does one thing very well. But you can't have too many advantages. And you can have advantages across the span of your business. In the marketplace, in the channels, in your supply chain, in your credit, even in your pricing model itself. The opportunities for advantage are limitless, and you want as many as you can possibly have.